Hello and welcome to the 9th episode of the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. My name's Ryan Blake, I'm the founder and CEO of Extreme Sports Performance. In this episode I'm going to be speaking to Dr Adrian Hemery. Adrian is an ex-GB decathlete, an athletics coach and a maths teacher. I'm going to be asking him the questions I ask all my guests. Who he is, what he does, where has he come from and what has he done along the way. What are the 3 key moments from his career so far? What are his 3 top areas of interest? What are the 3 most valuable things he's learnt to date? Here are his top 3 influences. What are his top 3 resources for information? What are his top 3 sports performance exercises or drills? What are his top 3 pieces of advice in life, exercise and or sport? We freestyle a bit between different questions as we went off at various tangents. We really enjoyed recording this episode. We hope you enjoy listening to it. Here we go. Dr. Adrian Hemery, thank you for joining us on the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. Can we just start off by telling the listeners who you are and what you do?
Well, thank you very much. It's nice to be here to join you on the podcast. So my name's Adrian. I'm now a maths teacher and athletics coach in West London.
Fantastic. And could you just elaborate on your career as a professional athlete and just maybe mention where you've come from, what you've done along the way to where you are now?
Sure. So I guess the story starts at school. I was into lots of sports, played team sports to a reasonable level, but nothing too elaborate, and did lots of individual sports, so everything from trampolining to horse riding. I was an energetic kid. The athletics, so I ended up as an athlete, but I started fairly early, but with rather inauspicious beginnings. So I was at age 13, I turned up to the district trials and tried out for every event and didn't qualify for the district team to go to the county championships, not even at the county championships, but didn't qualify for anything. And that was heartbreaking, but I did say at the bottom that if anyone could throw hammer or do pole vault, that they would go automatically to the county championships. So next year, I didn't have any poles, so I went for the hammer. So my athletics career began as a hammer thrower, at age sort of 14, still playing all the other sports, and that went pretty well, and I managed to get to the county championships and then get through the national championships. I mean, hammer's quite a minority event. So there wasn't that much competition, but I managed to make it to the national championships. I came 5th, and that was quite exciting. But so for a while I was a hammer thrower, and then when I was under 17, so 15, 16, I did hammer, but also started to play with the multi-events, the octathlon as it was then, and then later on the decathlon. And I guess through a mixture of looking at who was successful and what body type I wanted to be, and also just disposition. I think I didn't want to focus down onto one thing. I quite enjoyed the breadth of the combined events, the multi-challenge that was. So when I was 17, I decided I was going to specialise into the athletics. And I guess along the way, when I was 16, I got top 4 at the national champs, and that got me an England schools vest. That was quite a sort of important moment in me sort of to realise that it's something I could do and could be okay at. As I said, it wasn't necessarily a given. I come from quite a sporty family. My dad was an athlete, and so yes, athletics had always been there, but actually I was encouraged to do lots of different sports. So it was my choice to sort of say, actually, this is the sport for me, and that's what I wanted to do.
And the highest level you competed at? What was
so that? From there, I went on to university, and I got GB Junior Internationals. I was top ranked under 20, and then GB under 23, and then in 2002 I got my first senior international. So I didn't ever make it. I aspired to getting to higher levels after the Olympics and so forth, but unfortunately it wasn't to be for me. Injuries got in the way. I was doing fairly well and was on the fringe of sort of Commonwealth selection in 2002, but one way or another, I've moved my life to Loughborough and ended up doing a PhD and training there. It was mainly for the training that had motivated that move. And unfortunately, I improved on all the technical events, but my body didn't hold together. I got repeated hamstring and back problems that meant that I couldn't couldn't make a real go of it and get to where I hoped to be. Who knows what it could have been. But
You think injuries are probably a large reason why your career stopped where it did?
I think that's the case for many athletes.
Yeah.
And given my time again, I might have done things slightly differently. And I certainly think that I know I could have been better. I don't know how good, but I know I could have been better than my PB currently stands at.
Yeah.
Had I been able to have a continuous run at things.
And do you think, knowing what you know now, would possibly have prevented some of those injuries from happening, or
I think it goes right back to the start. Yeah, I think that I went at it like a bull in a china shop when I was 17 years old. I was very keen.
We all do. Yeah.
And I had a coach who was quite happy to let me go from training. I was a summer athlete, so I used to compete and train a couple of times a week, to training 6 times a week, including the running and weight sessions on the same day sometimes. And my body started to complain almost instantly, and that was just, I think, a mixture of bad guidance, but also I didn't necessarily listen to my body and pushed on, and just for a while it held up, but there were always in the background little niggling injuries and things that weren't quite right.
So you were about 17 at this time, or were you a bit older?
17,
yeah.
18, yeah.
So obviously we will both work together now with many different types of youth athletes in our school environment, some of which are around that age. If you could maybe have given advice to the younger you, to them now, what would be the kind of key takeaways that you'd probably want them to listen to and adhere to?
So I think first and foremost, technique. So you're going to do a lot of your sport, and if you can get your technique right, it minimises the pressure on the body. And so we all want to throw things a long way, or to be able to be very powerful, and that is an important part. But first, as soon as you start the sport, get your technique right, whether that be learning how to run, or learning how to jump safely, learning how to lift in the gym, whatever is appropriate for your sport. If it's tennis, making sure you're serving in a way that protects your back, for example. So speaking from athletics, there are certain events like the throws, like hurdling and high jumping, that if you're doing them badly, there's a lot of forces going on, and there's going to be twisting motions as well, that you need to be very careful about doing that because eventually you want to be able to do this quite frequently, and if you're doing that, then you're going to put a lot of strain on your body, and if you're not doing it well, you're going to break. It's an inevitable consequence. And so I would say, first of all, technique. Second of all, laying the foundations of conditioning. So making sure that you have enough flexibility, but not too much flexibility. So you're strong through the range that you require for your sport, and you're able to perform those movements in a sustainable, powerful, controlled way. And once you do that, and it's not necessarily an age-related thing. If you started at 13 years old, you might well be competent to start pushing things on at 16. But if you start at 16, it might not be until you're 19. But you should play the long game. So the later you've taken up your sport, the later I think you should start really stressing yourself. And so I think if I'd had my time again, I would have, I guess, 15, 16, 17, laid the groundwork. And you can still do other sports, that's also fine, but laid the groundwork for what was going to come. And then when you decide to specialise, then you can work hard, but only once, increment gradually. From, if you're doing 2 days a week, then please go through 3, and then 4, and then 5, maybe 3.5. You have an easier day, that you have something which is maybe a bit technical but isn't particularly stressful, so that your body gradually adapts to the stresses that you eventually want to put on it. So say if you look at what you want to be able to do when you're 24 or 25, when you're hopefully at the peak of your career, work back from there and just say, well, I want to gradually get there, and if I can have that continuous training, it's continuity which I think makes the biggest gains. I was lucky enough to be in the international team with Jess Ennis when she got her first international, and between that day and when she won her Olympic gold, she had one major injury. She'd hurt her ankle, which actually ruled her out of an Olympics, but that was a 12-year period, and she had one injury, and that was devastating for her at the time. But if you can have one injury, she just improved by 400 points a year for 12 years, and that's fine. And she was Olympic champion. I'm not saying that everyone can be Olympic champion. That's not what I'm saying at all. But if you can train continuously, you will improve. And even if you do the same things a bit smarter, you can build on just having done you're better the year after by virtue of having a year's more training under your belt. So I'd say the heart of it is injury-free progression through your sport. The injuries kill everything.
Yeah, sure. I completely relate, because obviously, as we've discussed before, sprinting was my thing when I was at school, and a lot of that was done on grass with poorly maintained grounds and lots of uneven holes and obstacles, and my Achilles went ping when I was just turning 17, and it's never been the same since, really. Also, obviously, I knew nothing about strength and conditioning or how to look after my body properly. That wasn't even a provision that was really provided or offered at school. So I think the times have changed, which is great, but I do regret not knowing that or knowledge, or having that knowledge available to me when I was younger, like many of the boys that we work with do now. Yeah, for sure. Whether they choose to listen to it or not.
I guess the other thing to say is, if you have had an injury, and it's not to lament, actually it might not be the end of the world. Hopefully it's not a career-changing injury. But if you've hurt your hamstring or gone over on your ankle, if you rehab it and treat that as seriously as you treat your other training, to make sure it's really strong, then it could be that injury has saved you. Why did the injury happen in the first place? Asking that question. And occasionally it'll be through random events, but often it's because you were doing something either systematically, or there was something systematically incorrectly, or there was something laying there underneath that you weren't addressing. And so maybe this is just at the time, if you listen to it, your body does tell you things.
Yes. Yeah, I think I completely agree. A lot of injuries happen again because they might not have been managed as well as they needed to be beforehand, or the first time they occurred, which is,
There's that phrase prehab, isn't there?
Correct. Preventative measures are there for a reason, to stop it from happening again. So I think it's difficult though to try and get younger athletes to understand that until they've actually experienced it, which is cruel but kind in a way. But everyone has to learn. Everyone gets injured, but as you said, it just needs to be managed properly. But obviously, the messages like I always give young athletes are just try and consistent things done well with good quality will lead to great results, and they won't happen overnight.
Agree with you. Totally.
But they will happen, and I think you just have to stick with it and follow that advice of people around you, and just trust it all works. So, just moving on, what would you say the three kind of key moments were from your kind of career so far in terms of athletics, if you had to pick three? So,
from my athletics career, I think that day when I got my first England schools vest when I was under 17, that gave me the belief that actually this is something I could do. So that was quite key. Then being top ranked GB junior, that was exciting, and that was a really good year for me. And then after that, I guess the injuries, like the hamstring tears and the back problems that I got, were also quite formative. But obviously, they played a big role inside my career and hindering that. But equally, it was a large learning experience, and something that I can hopefully take into my coaching and pass on, so that things I've experienced I can help others avoid. So
sure.
Yeah, I think that it has been a real journey of I did try and for about 8 years I did try and continue training until 2012, but each season something would happen and rule out parts of it. So you learn a lot along the way. You learn a lot about the body, and I've rehabbed what feels like every bit of me.
Yeah,
so
sure,
I know a lot about the aches
feels.
and pains. So I can often relate to other aches and pains that other athletes are having.
I think also if you have got one issue and then another one occurs and another one occurs, and you don't completely sort out the previous ones before the next ones occur, and it's like a Jenga tower, isn't it? You're just eventually one of the pieces will fall out and it'll come crashing down. So it is frustrating, but I think the more you try and maybe ignore it or push through, the worse it can get sometimes.
Definitely tallies with my experience.
Exactly. So in terms of kind of sports training, athletics, track and field, and your areas of specialisms or specialisations, what would you say your three main areas of interest are in that field?
So I enjoy the technical aspect. So decathlon's a highly technical event. It's got pole vault, hurdles, javelin, but I enjoy the technique of everything really. So learning how to run biomechanically efficiently. So I enjoy looking at that. I really enjoy the psychological aspect actually. Trying to work out how the mind, first of all getting people who are just trying out the sport, first of all getting them to explore it and ideally fall in love with it, and that's quite interesting throughout. In every sport there's highs and there's lows, and learning how to ride out the lows is an important part of it.
Sure.
And to make sure that there's going to be highs again in the future. If you get too down on yourself, there are always lows. There are always lows, and if you get too down on yourself, then you can stop the progress that was actually there and say, well, actually, okay, can we learn anything, and then can we move on? Learning how to do that's quite important, and then there's the individualization. I'm quite intrigued by. So you give certain cues or instructions to one person, and then or you give a certain training schedule and you get one outcome, and you give it to another person and you get a totally different outcome, and trying to match up what's best for that individual, and whether that be the way that you explain something. So if someone's a very visual learner, then you might have to show them a video. That'll be better than explaining it, because they're not taking it in through orally. Then that's not the way that they're going to learn it. If you just say, watch this, or a demonstration is better, it has to go along with the words that are being said. And also how people adapt to training. So some people are very fast twitch, and therefore they should be doing things at very high quality, and they'll get a lot out of going maximally quite often, but you have to give them plenty of recovery, plenty of rest between sessions.
Sure.
Whereas other people, they don't have. I wasn't particularly fast twitch, so I had a work ethic there. I had an engine, which meant I could train quite hard. Well, I say that, obviously I could have trained a bit smarter as well.
Sure.
But I didn't mind coming back and working hard. And that was what I brought to the table. So maximising your strengths, minimising your technical weaknesses, and making sure that you're plugging those gaps is, and that's different for every person. And that's quite different. I think Rubik's Cube of a puzzle to solve.
That is the art and science, isn't it, of coaching. I think with large numbers, very large numbers, it's very hard to individualise for everybody, but with smaller numbers and better coach ratios, coach to athletes ratios, it is more possible, but it's essential, especially at the higher level, because everyone's so different in all those different ways.
So I completely agree that it's difficult when there's large numbers involved. One thing I have found when you're coaching large numbers is if you're able to speak to people individually, maybe not during the session, but afterwards or at another time, then you can give them something to think about when you're doing a group activity. So the activity might be the same, and necessarily that there's only one member of staff or one coach present, and you're going to be doing 6 by 60 metres, but they can be focusing on different things, and as long as they know that, then they can be getting something individual out of that session, if it's on paper the same session. So you can be clever about it, but you have to be organised. If there's more people, it has to be
exactly.
It's very, the organisational element becomes tricky.
I think it's also very easy to overcomplicate things like that as well, isn't it? I think sometimes it's better to just choose one thing, or 2 things, 3 things max, and just focus on those rather than overcoach or overcomplicate, because I've made those mistakes, and it's definitely not as effective as just trying to have one clear goal, or less than 3 anyway.
Yeah, I think I'm a simple person really. I think that thinking about one thing is enough, and try to be focusing on positives rather than negatives. You know, the old adage, you know, don't think about pink elephants, and then suddenly the only thing that fills your brain. So, you know, don't point your toes, don't do this, and all the person's thinking about is that. Maybe you should think about the positive opposite. And, but try to think, well, this one thing, this time, are we going to be able to do this one thing? And you try to pick out what's most important for that individual. But it's not always easy, is it?
I think one thing I've started to do a lot lately is think about the things, or focus on the things I'm not going to do, which makes the things that I am going to do or need to do a lot better, a lot more clear, which is almost like a reverse engineering approach. But I've had quite a lot of success with that lately in big team sports, particularly with more adolescent age groups. So that's been quite interesting.
Yeah, it's an important question, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how little is enough?
Yeah.
Because actually, there's you stress the body, and you have to try and recover between each of these things, and that's actually the adaptation occurs in the recovery, not in the doing. So actually, in some sense, if you do too much, if you can do everything, that would be great. But actually, there's not enough time, or there's not enough energy, and so it's actually about what's the biggest bang for buck, what's going to give us the biggest reward.
Sure.
And so what's the minimum? What's the minimum that we could do to get the desired results? And often it makes things very, as you said, it makes things much more clear. And you just get to, okay, actually, we'll just do this well. And worry about, once we can do this well, then we'll worry about the next thing.
Exactly. No, it's fascinating, isn't it? And I think we could do an entire podcast on just that topic, but there's a lot of dimensions to it. Moving on, what would you say the most valuable things you've learnt are to date? Not necessarily just in athletics, but just in life, or with your combined roles as a teacher and a coach.
So, get enough rest. I think this is both for sport and for life, really. That sleep's really important. And,
sure.
So I guess that if your body is tired, there are times when you still have to train, but actually often that's if you're tired for a few consecutive days, or certainly a week, then you should probably listen to that and try to prioritise the sleep. Maybe if that means axing a session, then it means axing a session, because the question mark remains: is that session going to do you as much good as having a bit of time to recover, and you get better in the recovery?
Sure.
So, and I guess that as linked to that is like progressive overload, so that what you will be able to do in a year or 3 years down the line is less than what you can do now. So if you just keep on just taking the recovery, and when you feel better, working hard again, over time you will be able to train more frequently, and over time you will be able to spend more time working hard. So if you take Mo Farah, who's now training for the marathon, running 120 miles a week, probably running twice or even 3 times a day sometimes, he didn't start off doing that. He started off running 3 times a week at his local club, and that was 20 years ago, and now he's 10-time global champion, recently broke the European record for the marathon and won the Chicago Marathon, and is looking like he could be a contender for the Tokyo Olympics. So that has definitely been a progressive thing for Mo, because it wasn't instantaneous. He was a very good junior, so 97, 98, 99, he was one of the best juniors, and it wasn't until 2011 when he started to get global success. So something was happening in those 12 years, and it didn't happen overnight for him.
Sure.
But he did train consistently, and he did just gradual improvements, and constantly evaluating what was going to be best for him.
I did see recently how he approaches some of his recovery, and he does a lot of, well, when he can, I suppose when it's available, a lot of underwater treadmill running, just to kind of keep things flowing, taking the load off, which I thought was pretty fascinating. But I can't imagine that underwater treadmills are that available.
No.
To most people.
Once you're an 8-time global champion, it's easier to have the funds available to get the other 2, isn't it?
Correct.
I think he also sleeps in an epoxy tent, so his bed is encompassed in an oxygen deficient environment, so he's effectively sleeping at altitude, even when he's at sea level, and so that obviously is not available to most sort of 15-year-old aspiring distance runners, but you can do certain things. One that leads on to nutrition.
Yeah, sure.
So I think eating well And that I think the first thing that you should look at is what's on your plate at meal times, rather than spending a lot of money on supplements. Protein powders. It makes you feel like you've got the shake and everything's going really well, but actually, if you're eating high quality protein on your dinner plate, then I think that it might be a lot of. They say that athletes have expensive urine.
Well, exactly.
You're paying a lot of money for.
They're just called supplements for a reason, aren't they? And I think obviously most of the youth athletes I work with, particularly in a school environment, we have a no supplement policy because it's just not necessary. And as you rightly said, more politely than I usually do, but it's just an expensive trip to the toilet for most of them, and it's not a quick fix.
That said, obviously having something prepared so that you can eat within 15-20 minutes of a hard exercise session, that will make a really big difference. Sure. And if the only way to do that is by having a protein shake, then of course that's much better than not having anything at all. So I do caveat it, and if you're spending the day at the office and you're going straight to the gym, then by all means if you take a pint of milk with you, it's not going to be very nice once you've been to the gym. So there are times when this is something I would advocate. But if you could have a healthy source of protein, sure, then I would probably go for that first.
I've been reading some of the more recent nutritional research on recovery, and it always comes back to the positivity of the correct amount of carbohydrate as well. Yeah, absolutely. Which I think for some people, especially young people, is almost a swear word, especially in this day and age with what you see on social media and on the internet and everything, and body image kind of outside world. It's a shame that things have got that bad, but carbohydrates aren't a swear word.
Oh, absolutely.
If they're used,
a carb fiend, but also all in the right time and place. So
correct.
There's something known as glycemic index, I'm sure, which I know you know a lot about, but how quickly the carbohydrates hit your bloodstream. Sure. What glycemic index you want will vary from time to time. So if you're first thing in the morning and you're not planning to exercise until the afternoon, then you probably don't want something to hit your bloodstream in the next 15 minutes. So don't go for Cocoa Pops, go for porridge. Something to even out your blood sugar levels across the day, so it's sort of slowly releasing in. And then as soon as you've trained, then you probably do want something to be in there in 15 minutes, and they're actually having high release. Like if you're going to have a sugary drink, that is the moment to do it.
Exactly.
If you want to have a can of Coke or a Lucozade Sport, then that would be the moment. Incidentally, you can break up an equivalent of Lucozade Sport with a pinch of salt and a bit of squash in a bottle.
So save yourself a lot of money.
Save yourself a bit of money. Yeah.
Exactly. I think it does come down to preparation, then, doesn't it, in terms of nutrition? That's one thing. I've just been very lazy with that when I was younger, but now I've got older and a lot more injuries and take longer to recover from everything. I think I'm much more prepared for my recovery, and I do value my sleep a lot more, and I just know if I'm having a bad night's sleep or not enough or eating well, even for a day, it will affect me for probably 3 days afterwards. But I suppose it's just the beauty of getting older.
Yeah.
So just moving forwards, I'd be really interested to know the answer to this, actually. Would you say you've had any kind of key big influences in your life or mentors going through?
So my dad was an athlete. And
what did he compete in?
He was a hurdler, primarily. He won the Commonwealth Games at the sprint hurdles and the Olympic Games at the 400 metre hurdles.
What year was that?
1968, he won the Olympics up in Mexico City.
Awesome.
He broke the world record in that race.
Wow.
He picked up silver in the 4x4 relay in Munich and a bronze in the 400 hurdles again in Munich in 1972.
Wow.
So he had success.
Yeah.
He did try the decathlon. His running and hurdling were good, as you'd imagine. His throwing and pole vaulting were less good. So he went back to the 400 metre hurdles for the next Olympics.
Okay.
So until recently, we held the British father-son decathlon record.
Wow.
Until Daley Thompson's son did a decathlon.
Okay.
All I can say is that I scored more points than my dad, and I scored more points than Daley's son. So.
Okay, fantastic.
Obviously, the dad's letting the side down.
Good to know. Yeah. I'll put that on record. Yeah.
So he obviously a big influence, and we talked about athletics from all the way. But whenever the big championships of the year would come on TV, we'd sit there and watch it, and I learned an awful lot from him. I had a great hurdles coach when I was in Cambridge. Really, though, he taught me the importance of technique, and his eye was fantastic. He was a math teacher in Cambridge, and so not at a school in Cambridge, not at Cambridge University, but I guess in some sense I'm following his footsteps, and he taught me an appreciation for technique which I didn't have previously. So my first coach had just been much more prone to getting me to do a lot of work, and he brought the technical element to things, and appreciated that you could run very fast times even over events like 400 metres, which I thought you had to train hard for. He cut things out of my training programme, and I ran faster. So he taught me that, and having been through that process has definitely influenced my career as a coach. And then from there I moved to Loughborough, and I had John Anderson was my coach there as of Gladiators 3-2-1.
Yeah, fantastic.
And he taught me about hard work and about heart and bringing that to the table. He came from a very successful distance running coaching background. So he coached 5 world record holders in endurance, and so a lot of that is the sort of emotional and psychological side of it, and the hard work, and he was very upbeat about everything, and that I drew a lot of influence from him as well, about the way that you can be just in motivating people, and what you say on the day of competition can really make a difference, and often less is more, reminding people of what they've done, rather than telling them what to do. Yeah. So if you say you're ready, and he once related the story about so Dave Jenkins, who was being coached by John, was a 400 metre runner back in the sort of mid-70s, and he was going out to the European Championships, and he was a young 18-year-old, but had qualified for the Europeans. Now they'd been doing their training at a track down in Corby, and the inside lanes were used by all the distance runners, so they'd run in lane 8 all year round. No other reason, just than keeping out of everyone's way. Anyway, he was drawn in the final in lane 8, and John, instead of saying, "Oh gosh, you got lane 8, you can't see anyone," he said, "Dave, this is brilliant. This is exactly what we've been planning for." He was very worried about being in lane 8, so he said, "No, this is exactly what we've been training for. We've done all our training in lane 8. This is exactly what we've been planning for. This has played perfectly into our hands." John just making the best of the situation. Yeah. Anyway, Dave went out and won it in a British record, 44.9, and that tells you the way that the psychology of going into a race can make a massive difference as well.
Sure.
And you can talk yourself out of winning, even if you've done all the right things up until that point, and so you can muck it up on the day. So that was interesting.
That is cool. Awesome. That's really interesting, and I can't get him on Gladiators out of my head now. That. I did recognise the name, but now I definitely know who you're talking about. You've said that. So, if you wanted to find out more information about the latest research on this particular topic for coaching or athletics specifically, or sports science, where would you kind of go to for your resources on information?
Well, I read Athletics Weekly every week. Right. So they don't give you the details of studies, but they do actually have quite nice sections about introductory sections for young athletes, and that often leads into other sort of coaching discussions or then moving online. So I think you can do a lot worse than watching YouTube videos. There's lots of fantastic YouTube videos and podcasts and forums where people are discussing things. But also talking to other coaches. I think that just go and talk to people, discussion and thinking about ideas and bouncing them off people who maybe have more experience, or even just peers who are trying things out at the same time. What works, what doesn't, what's worked in your experience with certain athletes, because everyone has their different experiences, and they bring that to the table, and so sharing that is a big source for me.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. I think obviously there's such a wealth of information on the internet, but you have to have a little bit of a bullshit filter about what you look for, because there's also a lot of crap on there. But I think if you approach it with common sense, you can find some gold.
That's it. No, I think that there's so much information, and everybody's got their blog, and so reading the right one. But how do you know what the right one is? And I think that's by, as you say, filtering by talking to people who you know are knowledgeable and successful, and then going and looking at. Watching videos of the best people teaches you a great deal.
Yeah, of course.
Because you see how they do it, and suddenly all the things you've read in the theory and the literature, or have read online, you can see the best people doing it, and that suddenly brings it home. Okay, actually, I can just try and do this one thing. That's very very simple. I'm seeing them doing this element.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think it makes sense to speak to the people with the most wisdom, doesn't it?
It really does.
Usually, in my experience, everyone loves to give advice. So rather than asking for a favour or a question, asking for some advice usually is a good way of I suppose, opening or starting a conversation. So just moving on to the last few questions, what would you say your 3 sports performance exercises or drills you've had most success with, or just your favourites have been in your career?
So I guess I'm going to target this at, it's a podcast. I guess that the people who listen to this may be from a variety of sporting backgrounds, but so for acceleration, I really like front lying starts. I think they get your shoulders in front of your hips, put you in a good biomechanical position. You can make them competitive without compromising technique quite quickly. I think for young athletes this is a brilliant way. So just to describe what I mean, I'll say on your marks, and athletes have to lie down on their fronts with their fingers behind the line. So you're on your front, facing the direction you're going to run, fingers behind the line. Nothing's allowed to touch past the line, but your head can be past the line if it's above the ground. And then I'll say set. If anyone lifts off the ground at that point, they have to do press-ups. So it must be down on set, and then there's a clap or a go, and people should race to 10 metres, 20 metres, 30 metres, and this is a way that, particularly leading into the season, where we do quite a lot of this, and this builds in good mechanics. So it's actually very hard to get into a good position out of a start. You want your centre of mass to be right as far in front of your point of contact as you can, so that you can exert as much force as possible backwards against the track to accelerate you forwards. I'm in danger of getting to
there's no such thing as too much detail.
You want to get your shoulders, your back should be parallel with the ground, ideally. And you want to be driving with long, powerful strides, full extension, triple extension for the ankle, knee, and hip on the back leg. So that means your stride frequency will be quite low. Your cadence will be slow at the initial stages. You want to be driving out with big, powerful strides, and starting from a front lying position aids this. So I think that it automatically puts you in a position where you couldn't have got there if you were starting from a standing start position. You'd have to fall too far, and when it's competitive, people don't wait that long.
Sure, okay.
So that's one. I think plyometrics in the sandpit is wonderful. So jumping in sand, whether that's bunnies, whether that's jumping lunges, whether that's just jumps for height. It's safe because there's virtually no impact. It's very hard work. And by limiting the numbers, you can change what you look. If you want conditioning elements, if you want to run in the sand, this will definitely teach you how to pick your knees up. If you're wanting more rehabilitation, you can do just walking through the sandpit or hopping mini hops through the sandpit. You can go for power hops through the sandpit. You can do bunnies. There's lots and lots you can do in the sandpit with plyometrics.
Would you advocate that with or without shoes? Or do you find it's not really doesn't make a difference?
So make sure the sand's not got bits. If it's got rocks and or other bits of trash in there, then I would. You've got to be careful. But if it's good sand, then I'd go barefoot. I think it's really really good, and it builds up the little muscles in the feet. But you can do it. If you do it in trainers, then it'll still get a lot of benefit from it.
Sure.
It also depends a little bit on how injury prone this athlete is. So if they have a history of ankle problems, maybe I'd start off by doing it with trainers on, and then for the power ones, and then maybe the little exercises. If you're doing mini hops, then I'd do that barefoot. So you can a mixture maybe. Okay. So if you were going for 3 bunnies is a lovely one. So or bunnies through the pit. How far can you go in 3, or how few bunnies does it need to get out of the other end of the pit? And again, it's competitive. It's hard work. People are working maximally, but it doesn't compress the spine at the same time. So particularly for athletes who can generate quite a lot of force, but then also might not have the strongest backs. then it's good, and you can do a lot of it without getting hurt.
I've had a lot of success doing sandpit work with younger female tennis players who've been injured, and doing a lot of rehab work at the athletics track in the pit, and that so I completely understand where you're coming from with that. So yeah, that's really interesting.
And I guess the other one would be flying 30s. So to work on top end speed, have an acceleration zone that could be 10, but that's not going to be at top speed by then. 20, 30, 40 metres run in even. Once you go past 40, you're probably not going to be at your fastest at the end of the 30 metre zone, but essentially as long a run in as you want. And then between some light gates or some mechanism for timing between those 30 metre zone, and you're looking to go as fast as you can. And this puts your technique under stress, but also it really improves your speed. You can't do that many of them. I'd say if you're starting out 4 or 5 of them will be the most you can do in a session, and you will feel quite tired. Yeah. If you carry on going, the times will start slowing down. So even with 5 or 6 minute breaks, if you took longer, then maybe you could get a couple more out. But I think that you'll start to feel quite neurally fatigued if you do too many of these. But they're fantastic for working on your top end speed. So if you're a winger or someone who cares about being able to run fast, and not just your acceleration, then I'd say flying 30s.
Cool. No, I love it. I think we've started to do a lot of flying 30s and flying 40s with the rugby lads this year, and obviously the front 5 are doing shorter distances but with a slightly higher frequency or volume, and middle 5 are kind of in the middle, moderately, around about 40 metres, and then the backs are doing 50 plus, 60 metres. You can visibly see the impact it's had, just because I think they just back themselves more, particularly in a game-based scenario or a team-based sport. They just back themselves more and just not afraid to put their foot down, because they just know the speed's there if they need it. So they're brilliant drills, and I think if you are lucky enough to have light gates and you can time them and give instant feedback. Brilliant. They coach themselves really. Yeah. Brilliant. So I've possibly already asked this already. The last question I wanted to just to go through with you would be kind of top 3 pieces in life, exercise or sport. Like, I think we've already talked about those, but if you had to just recap on what those would be, either to the younger you or maybe to a younger athlete or type of athlete you'd be working with at the moment, where would you say you'd start?
I guess, as I said before, firstly, get the basics of your sport as good as they can be. Mm-hmm. So when you're young, you are neurally plastic. You're geared up. Your physiology is geared up to learn new things. Yeah. At that moment in time, learn all the new skills that you can and master them. So try to get mastery as soon as possible in your skills. You'll see improvement. So you'll get your improvements out of skill-based acquisition at this point. So I think that in the first phase of learning, you want to be it should be playful. You shouldn't be too fatigued, and you just want to be getting better and better at this skill, whether that's learning how to pass with your left hand or working on your top spin lob, whatever it is. Get a full armoury of technical skills, and become as good as you can be. Then make sure that you are holistically conditioned, and that means probably not doing heavy weight training, anything which engages a full body activity. So I think circuit training is brilliant, core training. Gymnastics is wonderful, so the things where you have to bridge as part of another, so it's not too contained, but you have to be thinking about things where you have to either swing on a bar, or you have to, if you have parallel bars and you do swings on this, or turning around, and you have to keep body control. Yeah. So you're building strength, you're also learning about your body and how to move that. I think this would be a wonderful way to build strength in the early stages. And then the psychological aspect, which is the hunger, but also marshalling that and applying it apportioning it at the right times, and accepting that things are not always going to go your way, but having the belief that if you do the right things, then they will eventually go that way. And I guess from what tied into that, have a think about what it is you want to do, what timescales are involved, and what you'll need to have when you're doing it at the level you want to aspire to. So if you have a dream of, for example, going to the Olympic Games, what things will you need to have in place, and how, working back from that, are they already in place? Is that okay? Do you have the facilities you need? Do you have the coaches you need? Do you have the support backup, the medical backup? Do you have is that all in place, or do you need to think about how you're going to change things over the course of that intervening time? So whatever time period that might be, it might be that there's 8 years and you don't have to worry about some of those things, but some of them you can change immediately. So have a long-term view on it, as well as the short-term plans. It's very easy to get caught up in the short term and find you're 4 years down the line, and there's some things you now need to be in place, and actually it's not easy to change them because you're sort of caught in a middle zone.
Awesome. No, really, really good. Thanks for that. The last question was, if people wanted to get in touch with you, maybe ask you some continuing questions about what we've discussed, but what would be the best way for them to do that?
So I think you can contact me through the Extreme Sports website. I think you can then pass any questions on, and I'll give any feedback.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, for all the listeners, if you do have any questions for Adrian, please go onto the contact page of the website and drop in any queries or questions in the box, and I will be sure to pass them on and get back to you directly. Adrian, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time and everything we discussed.
It's been a pleasure.
And have a nice half-term break.
Thanks, and you too. Emphasis on the break.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for listening to the 9th episode. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please don't hesitate to leave us a rating or review on your listening platform of choice. If you haven't already, please check out our website. We have weekly blogs on our blog page. You can sign up to our monthly newsletter via our sign-up page. Our online store consists of personal coach, training programs, nutrition plans, interactive training systems, toolbox, and coming very soon, membership packages. We also have several social media platforms: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Links to all these can be found at the bottom of every page on our website or via any search engine. That's all for now. Until next time, take care.